So good morning and welcome to the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of August 11th, 2020. I'd like to call the members to order. This meeting is being held remotely through Zoom, which is necessary in these times of physical distancing to keep everybody safe during the pandemic. Please note that those who do not need to participate in the meeting can also watch it on the live stream on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel. A reminder to participants to keep your microphones muted until I call on you to speak. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. Committee members will be called on first, followed by any other member of council who has joined the meeting. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For attendees, you will find the raised hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. For those calling in, please press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. The usual 5-minute speaking limit will apply. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest convenience. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to speak and provide written submissions to the subcommittee, residents can still make submissions to Planning Committee on item 3, which really focuses on 347 Gilmour Street and 278 and 280 O'Connor Street, or written submissions to council on items 1 and 2. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the clerk's office at committees@ottawa.ca or by calling 613-580-2424, extension 22953. So moving on to the agenda, are there any regrets? I do believe that we received last minute regrets from Vice Chair Quinn. Having received no other regrets, could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they are called.
Member Halsell?
Yes.
Member Podolsky?
Present.
Councillor Shirelli? Councillor McKenney? Member Conforti?
Here.
Councillor Brockington?
Here.
Councillor Moffat? See the Councillor Moffat's on the screen. Member or Vice Chair Quinn, Chair King, also present. You have quorum, Chair.
I also saw that Councillor McKinney.
Sorry, yeah, I just showed up.
Oh.
And I'm obviously here. So moving on to the next item, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yes, Barry Podolsky. On item number 2, the Booth Street Bridge, we are the heritage consultants to the City of Ottawa, and therefore I'm declaring interest on that item.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Are there any other declarations of interest? Seeing none, we can move on to the confirmation of minutes for Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. Are the meetings for that meeting of June 9th, 2020 confirmed?
Carried.
Excellent. So now we can move on with the rest of our agenda: planning, infrastructure, and economic development, right-of-way, heritage, and urban design services. Item number 1, application for demolition and new construction at 189 Stanley Avenue, a property located in the new Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mackenzie Kim here, Heritage Planner. So good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Let me know if you can't. Sorry, just one second. Perfect. So this application is for the demolition and new construction at 189 Stanley Avenue. Next slide, please. This property is located in the New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District, and it's designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It's located on the south side of Stanley Avenue, east of Gilmour Street, and it backs onto Stanley Park. Next slide. The property currently contains a one-story stucco-clad bungalow constructed in the 1950s with a couple of later additions, and it's a non-contributing property in the HCD. Next slide, please. So here are some images of the south side of Stanley Avenue showing east and west of the property. The two houses to the east in the top photo on the right represent mid to late 20th century construction, which developed about the same time as 189 Stanley, but much later than the rest of the historic subdivision. And that's likely due to the rail line that ran along the rear of these lots, as you can see in the 1928 aerial photo on the left. Next slide, please. Here's another photo of the north side of Stanley Avenue across the street and to the east. As you can see, the buildings in this block are generally low in scale, with a mix of front gable and flat roofs, with front porches and a mix of natural materials. Next slide. So the proposal includes the demolition of the existing bungalow on the property in order to build two new front-to-back semi-detached houses in its place. The HCD plan contemplates the demolition of non-contributing buildings, provided that consideration is given to the existing building's contribution to the streetscape and the appropriateness of the proposed development. So I'll give a bit of an overview of the proposal in a second, but in terms of the existing building, staff are of the opinion that while it doesn't really call attention to itself, the building doesn't meaningfully contribute to the Stanley streetscape, having very little relationship with the HCD in terms of its form and massing, and its uncharacteristically wide lot. So given that the building doesn't represent historic building fabric, staff have no objection to its demolition. Next slide, please. So here's a site plan just to give a bit of an overall sense of the proposed front-to-back semis. Each building is divided into two main units, with one facing the street and one facing the rear. There are also secondary dwelling units proposed in the basement of each of the four units. You may have noticed that in the staff report, it notes a total of 6 combined units, and that should actually say 8, one in each basement for each of the 4 units. So this proposal also requires a consent application to sever the existing property into 2 parcels so that each building is on a separate lot, as well as a minor variance application for relief from the heritage overlay. And I understand these applications will be considered by the Committee of Adjustment at one of their upcoming meetings. Next slide, please. As you can see, the front and rear of the buildings will essentially match, being 2.5 stories in height with gable roofs and simple returned eaves. They will be clad in red brick with front and rear ground floor porches with wood details for the columns and railings. The entrances for both main units will be under the porches, which are limited to 4 steps above grade, and the windows will be mainly rectangular, aluminum-clad vinyl units, which, although are somewhat contemporary in design and material, they still maintain a traditional solid to void ratio on various facades. Next slide, please. So these are the east and west elevation, the sides of the buildings. Again, both buildings will essentially match each other. Next slide. In terms of landscaping, the proposal does require some alteration to the existing property. The plan on the left shows the existing, with the red circles noting 3 trees that require removal. And these trees are either smaller and poor condition, and as shown on the proposed landscaping plan to the right, these will be replaced with new trees. An existing mature tree in the front yard, and that's circled in blue, is proposed for retention, and measures are proposed to ensure its protection during construction. Additional landscape changes include the removal of the existing driveway to be replaced with 2 new narrow walkways, which are very typical for the area, as well as new areas of lawn and planting in both the front and rear yards. Next slide. So staff have reviewed this proposal against the policies and guidelines in the New Edinburgh HCD Plan as outlined in the report and have determined it meets its intent and objectives. The plan includes specific guidelines for new construction and landscape alterations, and the ones that are applicable to this application have been summarized on the screen. The plan includes, just quickly here, the proposal meets these guidelines in that it contributes to and doesn't detract from the character of the HCD as simple background buildings that blend with the Stanley streetscape. They're compatible with the surrounding properties in their similar scale and setbacks, and by reflecting the character of the New Edinburgh HCD in their gable roof forms, simple front porches, and architectural details, as well as the red brick cladding. The design of the buildings will be of their own time, as modern interpretations of the traditional semi in terms of its front to back form, with other subtle contemporary elements such as the large rectangular windows. And these are balanced with more traditionally inspired design elements from nearby historic buildings, including the returned eave sills and ground floor porches with elements that reflect the character of the area. The development will maintain the existing grades on the property with the exception of some minor changes for stormwater management. And the proposed entrances will be 4 steps above grade, which will maintain the rhythm of the streetscape. The material palette will also maintains the traditional use of natural materials by using red brick throughout, as well as wood for detailed elements such as the porch columns and railings. Although the proposal requires some modification to the existing landscape, staff are of the opinion that the green character of the HCD will be conserved and enhanced by the retention of the existing tree, the removal of the driveway, and the introduction of additional soft landscaping in both the front and rear yards. Next slide. Staff also reviewed the proposal using Parks Canada standards and guidelines. The new buildings will conserve the cultural heritage value of New Edinburgh and are compatible with the character of the area. A cultural heritage impact statement was prepared in support of this proposal by Commonwealth Historic Resource Management, and staff concur with the findings of the CHIS. Next slide. In terms of consultation, this project was part of our pre-consultation pilot program, and that's a new program the Heritage Planning Branch implemented last year. The pilot is intended to encourage early consultation with not only heritage staff, but also with the community association. So in this case, the applicant came in originally last fall with an alternative version of this proposal, which staff and the community association had significant concerns with. And as a result of that consultation and those comments, the applicant chose to revise the proposal in order to better meet the intent of the HCD guidelines and improve compatibility. And just in terms of our regular consultation process, the Ward Councillor, Heritage Ottawa, and the Community Association were notified of this application and offered the opportunity to provide formal comments. And those have either been included in the report or provided to you directly. Neighbors within 30 meters were also notified by mail in advance of today's meeting with an opportunity to comment. Next slide. So just in conclusion, the staff recommendation is to approve this application subject to the conditions outlined in the report relating to the provision of final exterior cladding samples and also the implementation of the tree protection measures. The recommendation is to delegate authority for minor design changes and to issue the heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for that report. We do have a number of registered speakers, I believe 4, and the first registered speaker on the list is John Stewart from Commonwealth Historic Resource Management.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm not sure how to, wait a minute. There we go. Now you can see me. I'm here representing Mr. Ferrier and the 189 Stanley Street submission. We prepared the CHIS. I really don't have a lot more to add to Mackenzie's presentation. I think she's covered all of the points, but I'd like to make a couple of observations. I think it's important just having a look at this and the process that we went through. The proposed development is contextual and fits into the character of Stanley Avenue. Given its location backing onto Stanley Park, the two-story duplexes are optimum in the terms of usability and amenity of site functionality. I have slides, and I'm not sure how to put those in. Thank you very much. This is a contemporary interpretation of the existing housing stock that is highly respectful of the neighborhood. At a time where there is a very real housing shortage, this development shows that density can be provided at a scale and a massing that respects even the most established neighborhoods. I'm pointing out here the blue arrow off to the left-hand side. That's the location of the 189 Stanley, just off of Kiefer. And what you see here is a 1901 a fire insurance map where, in fact, the four buildings that you can see in the picture didn't exist until 1935. And when the lots were developed, they're much larger and shallower. And as a result, the architectural style is quite distinct from the rest of the New Edinburgh building stock. Things like the narrow side lots, if you look at the other buildings, you've got a very narrow front facade and then a deep lot, and you have the lanes in behind. Can I go to the next slide, please? This is an interesting, this is a comparison, and Mackenzie mentioned the discussions that were held. It's a comparison of the initial three-story flat roof design, and next to that is the revised two-story and gable proposal. It illustrates the extensive revisions undertaken by the developer to conform to the guidelines and to retain the mature street trees on the property. And my comment here is that the guidelines work. It's a very positive. Could I go to the next slide, please? The design expression is contemporary, relying on the precedent examples as inspiration for the form and mass. The material palette selection is also evocative of early examples along Stanley Avenue and throughout the district. Given its position next to the park, the scale of the development, the palette of finishes and materials, the units will conform comfortably into the neighborhood and support the character-defining attributes of New Edinburgh Heritage Conservation District with similar setbacks, color palette, and traditional front verandas. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I trust that you'll see this as a positive introduction into the community and approve this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart, for your comments. I wanted to see if there are any questions from the subcommittee at this time. If not, the next speaker that is registered is Murray Chown. So we invite him to speak.
So thank you very much, Chair King, members of the subcommittee. I will be quite brief. I simply want to point out that our client worked and his design team worked very closely with the city's heritage staff to revise the design approach to the redevelopment of this property. And I think it's been a very successful exercise leading to the recommendations you have before you from staff today. The other thing I'd simply wanted to point out was we did have a virtual meeting with the New Edinburgh Community Alliance to discuss the revised approach to the redevelopment of this property. And as Ms. Kim noted, their comments are provided in the staff report, but I just want to bring them to your attention, where the New Edinburgh Community Association state that they, quote, endorse without hesitation the most recent proposal for the redevelopment of this property. The architectural team of Ottawa Carl Construction has done a commendable job in producing a design that respects the guidelines and directives inherent in New Edinburgh's Heritage Conservation Plan. NECA also supports the statements contained in Section 5 of the excellent and detailed cultural heritage impact statement prepared by Mr. Stewart and his firm. Those are the extent of my comments for now. Mr. Chair, obviously we're happy to answer questions, but hope that the committee will endorse the recommendations from staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And were there any questions from the committee for this document? Seeing none, the next registered person on the list is Jonathan James Moffat Blake. I'm not. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair King and to the subcommittee members. My name is Jonathan Blake, and I live at 185 Stanley, which is the residence directly beside the proposed development. And I have one question, really. It boils down to one question. On the letter that the city sent on the 27th of July indicates that the number of units will be 6 units within the two proposed semi-detached buildings. In a telecon yesterday with Mackenzie Kim on the 10th of August, Ms. Kim advised that the total number of units will now be 8 within that space. From the document, a cultural heritage impact statement for 189 Stanley Avenue, Ottawa, Ontario, revised in June 2020, it implies that the long semi-detached would have two main entrances, leading us to conclude that there would be 2 units that would be included in this build. In the summary on page 18, it indicates that the single-family home was out of character with the aesthetic and lot fabric of the neighborhood. I'm not sure that I would agree with that statement, having lived in our house for 20 years. And later in that paragraph, it says the development shows that density can be provided at a scale and massing that respects even one of the most established neighborhoods. I'm going to come back to the idea of massing and scale in a minute. From the report to the Build Heritage Subcommittee, 11th of August 2020, submitted on the 28th of July, page 5, under the project description, in that paragraph, it says for a total of 6 combined units. Under page 11 of that very same report, and I realize and I respect that there's been an awful lot of dialogue with NECA and the Heritage Committee within the community. However, I guess my question is, were all of these approvals predicated on the idea of 6 units spread across these two buildings, or 8? And it brings into question the baseline for a lot of the review by the community, and as it really boils down to the scale and massing of this development. Then finally, from a cultural heritage impact statement for 189 Stanley Avenue, section 4.1, it reads, the bylaw requires that when a building is in the overlay is removed, it must be rebuilt with the same character at the same scale, volume, massing, and it says volume again. I'm presuming that might be an error. Floor area, and in the same location as existed prior to its removal or destruction. And I would put it to you that fitting 8 units into this space does not appear to be consistent with the direction provided under that bylaw for the massing and volume of this. And if the review was looked at and evaluated from the perspective of 6 units, then I think it calls into question whether this should be looked at from and revert to the baseline that may have been presented to the reviewers, including yourselves. I think that there's been a lot of work, and I'm not opposed to the development. So, and I think there's a lot of positive, and I think it does fit in to the overall look and feel of the neighborhood. My concern is that it's going to dramatically change with the very large density of having 8 potential residences in an area that is actually quite small. I think there's been some references to the fact that it's wide, the lot is wide, but it's not particularly deep. So my question is, and my request is to really have a look and understand whether the approval and the information that's being presented to the committee and the decisions and the recommendations that have led to that are based upon the 8 units as opposed to 6. And lastly,
5 minutes are up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blake, for your comments. Were there any questions of this deputant by any of the members? I don't see any questions. So we have one more registered speaker, and that is Robin Lim.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. And thank you. Actually, I'm now realizing this pre-consultation pilot program has actually been a really positive step forward. I'm the homeowner and resident at 188 Stanley Avenue, one of the truly historical properties in the neighborhood. Across the road, you'll have seen it in the photographs, the white, now stucco property on the corner at Stanley and Kiefer. So I'm pretty much directly opposite what will be the development. I will start by just saying I echo the comments and questions of Mr. Blake. I am happy to have been provided the ability here to see what the original design proposal was, and commend the various groups involved in changing the design so that it now looks like what it looks like. It certainly does seem to fit much better. I'm not opposed to the development. I agree with that we need to be able to densify where possible and intensify in the city, rather than spread just more into very important other lands around the city. I do echo Mr. Blake's questions around the 6 versus 8 and the process with which the various approvals were taken, and on the basis of whether that was the 6 or the 8. It sounds like it might have been on the 6. So I won't repeat what he said. As for the design, as I said, I actually think it will fit very well. I think that was done conscientiously with good effort and adaptation and willingness to listen. So I commend that. I have a question because it was, I think Ms. Kim had mentioned about there will be possibly minor design changes and those will be delegated. I wondered what the design space may have been scoped out to be, within which minor design changes could be taking place that will be delegated. Having lived in the neighborhood for 25 years, and in this particular house, I've had it since 2011, and actually moved out for the CSST construction, which is a whole other issue, but I'm back. It has been possible to see how some developments have started out and have changed from their original proposals, and I'm not going to go into details, but so that is something that I and many other residents of the neighborhood are aware of as dynamics in a development procedure. So I wondered if somebody can inform about the whether there have been discussions about the scope of the design space under which so-called designated minor design changes can take place, if that means they can raise the height of the building and various other things, which I know has happened in other developments over the years. Again, thank you very much for the time to give my comments. I commend the improved process. Hopefully there were lots of lessons learned from previous consultations. I do note that, this was a very speedy—
1 minute left.
Thank you. Very speedy between Thursday when I received the thing in my mailbox and today. as somebody who's not following this, I have other things on my plate these days. So that was a little quick. The timing in over a weekend in August is a little strange. If you're trying to do a consultation, I also would suggest, I know that you've given notice to those of us who are neighbors, but segmenting the public with immediately impacted neighbors in a formal way would also be something to consider. Anyway, that's, I think, most of what I have to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn. And are there any questions for the last deputant? If not, does the committee have any questions for staff? And I see that member Podolsky has a question.
Sorry, Chair King, it wasn't a question for staff, but just a comment that I would like to make when it's appropriate.
Okay, so then we can move on to member Brockington.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. To staff, just a question about the number of units. Can you just give or clarify the, the history of what was originally proposed, how that formally gets amended, how you go back and recheck whatever studies or reports had to have been done? I know in the grand scheme of things, the number of units is small, but it has been raised, and I want to hear from you how that gets cross-checked.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. So I can advise that the number of units have not changed. It's an error on my part in the staff report, and I can also confirm that the Heritage Act doesn't regulate use. It doesn't regulate what happens on the interior. So the recommendations before the committee this morning were not predicated on whether the proposal was for 6 or 8. It's really about the form of the building and does that fit compatibly with the district.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. And I did have one question, since I see no other questions, which is a follow-up as well to Mrs. Lim's question about the scope of minor design changes. I'm wondering if staff can address that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that recommendation is pretty standard for all of our applications. As you can imagine, as the working drawings sort of progress and for building code purposes, there might be some minor tweaks that have to be made for code and things like that. Obviously we would review the building permit prior to issuance. So we would be looking for any of those minor changes. And I would say that minor, obviously we would have to look at everything within the scope of the project, and does it impact the recommendations that that this committee would have seen and council would have seen. Typically their changes similar to, if a window is in a different location, things like that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Just noting as the ward councillor that as we have seen, there have been specific changes around density, around scaling, around massing, around design, around compatibility with surrounding properties. As the ward councillor, I gave I thought that this was actually an excellent example of replacing a non-contributing building in a heritage conservation district with appropriate infill that actually really does reflect the design and the streetscape of the community. So that's just a clarification in terms of some of the comments that I provided when I was involved, when our office was involved with the file. So on this item, is the report carried?
Carried.
Carried.
This report is now scheduled to be presented to council on August 26, 2020. Number 2, application to alter to the Booth Street Bridge, 9 Fleet Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Yes, I can. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Looks okay. I'm seeing some nods. Okay. Okay, so I hope the presentation is up on screen there. In front of you today is an alteration for the historic Booth Street Bridge, which is designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. There's a historic photo up on screen there. Next slide. A location map. The bridge is located in the Breton Flats area beneath the new Booth Street Bridge, just north of Albert Street. Next slide. These are some current photos of the site. The bridge is a close spandrel stone arch bridge with stone parapets. It was constructed circa 1873. It crosses the aqueduct that brings water from the Ottawa River to the Fleet Street pumping station. Next slide. The bridge is designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act as part of the larger designation for the Ottawa Waterworks. A map of that waterworks is up on screen, and a little red box is around where the bridge is. The designation includes the Fleet Street pumping station, the open aqueduct, and the tailways to the north of the pumping station, as well as the stone bridges that cross the aqueduct, including the Booth Street Bridge and the triple span Pooley's Bridge. The waterworks was designed by one of Canada's leading early civil engineers, Thomas C. Kiefer, in 1872 to 1874, and the role was to pump the unfiltered water from the Ottawa River into the city's water distribution system. Next slide. Again, just some historic photos of the bridge showing it in 1903, and then again in 1968. Next slide. The bridge is owned by the City of Ottawa. A 2018 structural review identified serious structural deficiencies in the bridge and noted that the center arch is in better condition than the 2 extensions. The stone faces of the east and west extensions were reported to be in poor condition due to cracking, spalling, and mortar loss. You can see some of the condition on those photos. Next slide. Again, just showing some of the existing condition. The southern portion of the east parapet shown here was dismantled and stored in 2016 due to structural issues. Next slide. So that brings us to the proposal in front of us today, which is to remove the east and west extensions to the bridge and rehabilitate the original central portion of the bridge as a pedestrian, cycling, transportation link for future multi-use pathways. So on the site plan, you can see from the existing, the width, to the proposed, it has been narrowed. The restoration work is going to be based on the original Kiefer drawings from 1873, which are up. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say next slide. Hopefully that's what's up on screen. The original 1873 plans for the bridge. Next slide. This is a cross section of the bridge. You can see again the proposed reduction in width. The 2 extensions which are proposed to be removed were added between 1889 and 1910 and are approximately 5.5 meters in width. Next slide. This is a west elevation that shows what the rehabilitated bridge will look like. It's unknown whether the original central arch and its elements, such as the stone faces or spandrel walls or wing walls, will be intact or if it was removed following the construction of the extensions. However, following the sensitive removal of the extensions, the condition of the central arch can be evaluated in more detail. Next slide. This is the east elevation. The existing stonework will be repaired and repointed wherever possible and reconstructed using reclaimed stone from the dismantled extensions where necessary. If any stone is unusable, it will be replaced in kind. Next slide. This is a detail showing the parapet wall, the stone parapet walls. The height of the walls will be reconstructed to match the height of the 1873 walls, and a contemporary metal pipe railing will be installed on top to meet the minimum height required by the municipal cycling standards. The black metal railing is simple in design and will be compatible and distinguishable from the stone walls. Next slide. Staff reviewed the proposal using the standards and guidelines. The proposal conserves the heritage value of the bridge and combines sensitive rehabilitation and restoration to restore, reconstruct, and protect this heritage resource. The bridge is part of the larger Ottawa Waterworks complex, which was constructed in 1872, and as such, returning it to its original dimensions from the period of historical significance is appropriate. Next slide. The City of Ottawa official plan states that the city will protect, improve, and manage its cultural heritage resources in a manner that furthers the heritage objectives of the plan and sets an example of leadership for the community in the conservation of heritage resources. As I mentioned, this bridge is owned by the City of Ottawa, and the sensitive rehabilitation and restoration that is taking place meets this policy. So in conclusion, staff recommend to approve the application subject to the implementation of the conservation measures outlined in the heritage brief, to delegate authority for minor design changes to the GM of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development, and to issue the heritage permit with a 5-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that detailed presentation. I note that we have no registered speakers on this item. Does the committee have any questions for staff on this item? And I see that Member Brockington has a question, and I see also Councillor McKinney as well has a question. So Councillor Brockington.
Chair, this has nothing to do with how I'm going to vote. I'm going to support this, but just a question out of curiosity. Do infrastructure projects like bridge rehabs get greater priority for funding because they are on the registry? Is there a concern that a heritage bridge in this case might deteriorate to a point where it can't be saved and therefore funds in the grand scheme of things get reprioritized to heritage bridges?
Through you, Chair, I have my colleague Ian Izzard, Senior Engineer in Infrastructure Services here, who can maybe speak to that. But Ian, are you available to answer that question?
Hi, Ian Izzard from Infrastructure Service Group. I'm here and available, but I don't have a great answer to your question. That's the asset management group that controls the funding for the bridges and really sets the priorities on which infrastructure gets treated next. Unfortunately, I really don't have a good answer to your question, with apologies.
Like I said, Mr. Chair, we'll just park the question. I would like an answer at some point. It doesn't impact my vote today, but I'm just asking out of curiosity.
That's fair, and of course we'll ask staff to follow up. I did see, I believe, the ward councillor as well wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment, actually, no questions. I worked with staff for a couple of years, thanks to Ian and Heritage Cultural staff for this report. This is a neat little bridge. It's a bridge underneath a bridge. It didn't start out that way. Hopefully it won't be a bridge under a bridge under a bridge. We'll stop building roadways at some point, but this is kind of if you haven't been down here, you can now, because we've built the LRT alongside of it. So you can go down, you can Tennessee Station in around behind there. You can really get a good look now at the waterway, at the aqueduct, at those bridges that cross it, at the tail races, the whitewater rafting. Just just a quick walk down the pathways, and it's something that is unique in this city, that you can whitewater raft right in the middle of the downtown, the absolute downtown. You are whitewater rafting. So if you haven't been down there, if anybody hasn't been down there, I encourage you to go. As I'm speaking, I'm thinking to myself, maybe that's a James clock that we'll have to put together. But I just wanted to thank staff for the work on this. And I was really happy that the recommendation was to repair rather than to replace. Again, these are unique little bridges, and at some point, as we continue to develop this area, They will be widely used, and people will wonder how we ever let them, go unused for as long as they did. But I guess we can say that for the whole of LeBreton Flats, really. But thank you. And yeah, if anybody wants a tour, I'd be happy to physically distance a tour with you through the area.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm certain that some members will probably take you up on that offer. If there are no other questions, is this report carried?
Carried.
Excellent, carried. This report is scheduled to be presented to Council on August 26, 2020. Our next item, our third item, is application for demolition of 347 Gilmour Street and alteration of 278 and 280 O'Connor Street, properties located in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Yes, Chair, that's me again. I'll just get myself set up here. Okay, so the next application is for demolition of 347 Gilmour Street and alteration of 278 and 280 O'Connor Street. Next slide. These properties are located in the Centretown HCD. It was designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act in 1997. Next slide. There's a map showing the properties. They're located at the northwest corner of O'Connor and Gilmour Street. Next slide. Some photos of the three buildings. These are the first two. The building on the left is 280 O'Connor Street, and the building with the green canopy is 278 O'Connor Street, which was designed by the architect Frederick John Alexander. Both properties have a high degree of architectural integrity and elaborate detailing, and both are proposed to be incorporated into the development. Next slide. This is the photo of the building at 347 Gilmour that's proposed for demolition. All three of these properties were constructed circa 1879 to 1901. The other photo shows the south side of the building at 280 O'Connor. Next slide. These are just some photos looking east and west on Gilmour Street with the red rectangle around the subject properties. Next slide. A detail showing O'Connor Street. The first photo with the sort of high rise in the background is the north portion of Gilmour Street. You can see it features different buildings with different construction dates, varied heights, massing, and architectural styles. And then the other photo is the south side of Gilmour Street, which is across from the proposal. You can see it's a much more intact streetscape with 2.5 to 3-story red brick buildings. Next slide. Again, just some more contextual photos looking north on O'Connor Street now. Building again highlighted, north and south, building highlighted with the red rectangle. Next slide. That takes us to the site plan and the proposal that's in front of you today, which is to demolish the building at 347 Gilmour Street and integrate the buildings along O'Connor Street into a new 6-story building. The new building will have 65 residential units and underground parking. The application will also require an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and site plan control. An earlier version of the design was reviewed by the UDRP and was subsequently advised to address the comments provided. Next slide. Just a detail showing the images, with two images showing the portions of 278 and 280 O'Connor to be retained. The hatching illustrates the portions that will be demolished, and the portions that are not hatched will be incorporated into the development. These portions of the buildings will accommodate 5 apartment units, and the proposal also includes detailed restoration of the buildings, including the decorative wood trim, gables, porches, windows, and brackets. Next slide. These are the east and south elevations. On the O'Connor Street facade, you can see those retained buildings with the new 6-story addition flat roof building behind it. And then the Gilmour Street facade has the retained portion of 280 O'Connor Street and is articulated with 2 3-story bays as well. And then I think in some of these In this elevation, maybe the next one as well, there's a little bit of discoloration, but the brick is proposed to match throughout. These are the west and north elevations showing the interior sides of the building. The first 4 stories are clad in red brick with evenly spaced rectangular window. The top 2 stories are clad in gray metal panels with large glazing window or with large glazing. And the 5th and 6th stories are stepped back from the lower stories. Again, on the north elevation there's a little bit of discoloration where it might look like it's metal paneling, but the proposal is for 4 stories of red brick. Next slide. These are some additional renderings showing the proposal. Next slide. This is the building at 347 Gilmour Street, which is proposed for demolition. It's a vernacular interpretation of the Queen Anne style, Queen Anne Revival style, and it's a Category 2 building in the HCD. Staff are recommending approval of the demolition of the building at 347 Gilmour Street because the architectural integrity of the building has been negatively impacted by several unsympathetic additions and alterations, including the removal of the original porch, the addition of an entrance vestibule, the enlargement of the window openings, and the addition of a new dormer to the top story, which alters the roof line. These alterations have diminished the cultural heritage value of the building and removed most of the character-defining elements. The building is also fairly typical of Centretown, and there are more representative, intact, or high-style examples of this style. It was evaluated by the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement for the proposal, and it was assessed that the building had a marginal architectural example, poorly altered over the years, that is in poor condition. And finally, the demolition of the building will allow for a more cohesive overall project that will benefit the HCD. Next slide. The proposal meets the Centretown HCD plans as it uses brick veneer as the primary finish, which is a typical material palette of Centretown. It is contemporary in design and distinguishable and sympathetic to the surrounding buildings, notably through the meaningful retention of the 2 heritage buildings along O'Connor Street, its use of red brick material, and the inspiration of design elements from nearby buildings. Next slide. Again, to reflect the character of the existing building, the proposal complements the character of Centretown through the use of compatible materials, step backs, facade articulation, cornices, and window openings. The form and massing reflect building found throughout the HCD and the character of the district. Next slide. The HCD guidelines state that buildings should be generally 3 to 4 stories in height. The proposed building is 6 stories. However, significant step backs have been included to respond to this direction. You can see a streetscape elevation here showing Gilmour Street, but you can see that on the O'Connor facade, the new building is set back behind the retained portions of the O'Connor Street buildings and then steps back again at the 4th floor to frame the historic structures. The material on the 5th and 6th story changes to metal paneling, which also reduces the visual impact. Again, if you look at the streetscape, you can see the building in the context of the north side of Gilmour Street and the additional heights on that side of the street and to the north of the property. Next slide. Another image showing building heights to the north of the property. You can see a 10-story building to the west, then 13 stories, 7 stories, 6 stories to the north. Staff believe that the scale of the building is appropriate to both the immediate surroundings and the HCD as a whole. Next slide. The last Centretown HCD policy is that guideline rather, is that the form of building should reflect the U-shaped and H-shaped patterns. The proposed new building has a plan that's generally rectangular in form. However, the conserved historic buildings along O'Connor Street will retain that historic streetscape, and the facade along Gilmour Street is again articulated by bays and projections to help reflect the rhythm of the existing Gilmour streetscape. Next slide. Staff reviewed the proposal and determined it meets the standard and guidelines. The building to be demolished at 347 Gilmour is of limited cultural heritage value, and the removal of the building will not affect the overall cultural heritage value of the HCD. The new addition conserves the heritage value of the district and is compatible with, distinguishable from, and sympathetic to the buildings at 278 and 280 O'Connor Street. Staff also used the Centretown CDP as part of their review, which has guidelines related to infill in the district. The proposal meets these guidelines through the use of step backs, red brick cladding, and articulation of the facades through projection bays and canopies. In terms of consultation, Councillor McKinney, Heritage Ottawa, and the Centretown Citizens Community Associations were notified, as well as neighbors within 30 meters of the subject property. So in conclusion, staff believe the proposal meets the applicable heritage guidelines, including the Centretown HCD study and the Parks Canada standards and guidelines. Staff recommendation is to approve the application to demolish 347 Gilmour, conditional upon documentation of the building. Approve the application to alter the buildings at 278 and 280 O'Connor, subject to the condition of the implementation of conservation measures, which are detailed in document 13. To delegate authority for minor design changes to the GM of PI, and to issue the heritage permit with a 3-year expiry date. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that presentation. We do have 2 speakers registered, providing a dual report. That's Kayla Blakely and Greg Megno of Novatech. And you can go ahead.
Kayla, do you want to lead on?
Okay. Okay, if everyone can hear me. My name's Kayla Blakely. I'm a planner with Novatech. I'm joined with Greg, and we're here on behalf of the owner. We have put together a brief presentation. If you'd like, we can provide a bit more context in terms of planning policy and responses to heritage policies. But I would thank Anne for her detailed presentation. I think she covered a lot of information. So we're also happy to just respond to any questions that the subcommittee might have.
Well, if that's the case, I'll ask, do any members of the subcommittee have any questions for Novatech? I also will want to acknowledge that Tony Kazarian, the owner, and Robert Martin of Robertson Martin Architects are also here and are available to answer any questions. And I'm seeing nobody raising their hands to ask questions. So does the committee have any questions for staff? And I'm also not seeing any questions for staff. So is the report carried? Carried. The report is scheduled to be presented to Planning Committee on August 27th, 2020. To date, there are no in-camera items. There are no notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting. None of those notices of motion to date. There are no received inquiries to date. Other business, planning circulations, zoning bylaw amendment proposal summary for 225 Scholastic Drive. There is a planning circulation on the agenda, which was distributed to members prior to the meeting. Members of the public had the opportunity to comment through DevApps on ottawa.ca. It is anticipated that the related heritage application will be considered at subcommittee at its next meeting on September 8th, 2020. Is there any other business? Seeing none. On adjournment, is the motion carried? Carried. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. The next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September 8th, 2020.